The glass slipped from my son-in-law's hand and shattered on the marble floor, but nobody moved to clean it up, because everyone in the room was already staring at me. Dominic had just told 40 of my closest colleagues, the men and women who had helped me build 30 years of bridges and highways and overpasses, that I was losing my mind. He said it with a smile. He said it like a man who believed he had already won. He had not won. He just did not know that yet. My name is Edward Calloway. I am 64 years old. For 3 decades, I ran Calloway Civil Group, a mid-sized engineering firm out of Columbus, Ohio. We built things that mattered. Overpasses on the I-71, a pedestrian bridge in downtown Cleveland that my late wife Carol said was the prettiest thing she had ever seen made of steel. I was not a flashy man. I did not drive expensive cars or wear tailored suits. I drove a Ford F-250 that had mud on the tires and blueprints on the passenger seat. I believed in work. I believed in integrity. I believed that a man's name was the most valuable thing he could ever build. I had spent the last 3 years believing that my daughter Melissa had married a man who shared those values. I was wrong. The dinner was meant to be a celebration. 30 years of Calloway Civil Group. I had rented the private dining room at the Severn House, a restored Victorian mansion turned restaurant on the north side of Columbus. 40 guests. People who had poured concrete with me in the rain, who had signed off on permits at 2 in the morning, who had attended Carol's funeral and stood in the back of the church because there wasn't enough room in the pews. Real people. People I trusted. I had paid for everything. The dinner, the wine, the custom crystal glasses engraved with the company logo that Carol had designed herself the year we started the firm. I had written the check without blinking because these people deserved it. They had given me 30 years of their lives. Dominic had been standing near the bar for most of the evening, working his way through the good bourbon and laughing too loudly at his own jokes. He was 35 years old, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way that certain men are handsome before the character catches up to the face. He had charm in abundance. He had ethics in short supply. He called himself a real estate developer. What he was, as I would later learn in excruciating detail, was a man drowning in debt who had decided that the most efficient solution to his problem was my lake house. Carol's lake house. It sat on the eastern shore of Buckeye Lake, 45 minutes from Columbus. We had bought it the year Melissa was born. A small, cedar-sided cabin with a screened porch and a dock that needed replacing every 5 years. It was where Carol had taught Melissa to fish. It was where I had proposed to Carol the second time because I had done such a poor job the first time that she had said yes out of pity, and we both knew it. It was where Carol had spent her last good summer before the diagnosis, sitting in the Adirondack chair on the dock with a paperback mystery and a glass of sweet tea, looking out at the water like a woman at perfect peace with the world. She passed away 2 years and 4 months ago. Dominic wanted to use it as collateral for a commercial development deal in Westerville. He had come to me twice before the dinner, both times framing it as a business opportunity. A sure thing. A chance for me to finally put a dormant asset to work. Both times I had told him no. Both times he had nodded, like a man who understood, and I had believed him. He came to me a third time that night. It was 20 minutes before I was supposed to give the anniversary toast. I was standing near the window with a glass of red wine, watching the streetlights come on outside, thinking about Carol. I was thinking about how much she would have loved this room, the crown molding and the gas fireplace and the way the candlelight sat on the white tablecloths like something painted. I was not thinking about Dominic. Then he was beside me. He did not ease into it. He was past easing into things. He had had 3 bourbons and the confidence of a man who believes himself overdue for a yes. He leaned close, smelling of that cologne he ordered online in bulk, and he said, very quietly, that he needed me to sign the paperwork on the lake house. He had brought a notary. She was waiting in his car. I put my wine down on the windowsill. I said, "Dominic, we have talked about this. The answer is no." It was no in February, and it is no tonight. His jaw tightened. I watched the politeness drain out of his face the way water drains out of a bathtub. What was underneath was not something I recognized. It was cold and calculating, and not even slightly sorry. He said he thought we could handle this quietly. He said he had given me every opportunity to be reasonable. He said that Melissa agreed with him, that she thought I was being sentimental to the point of being irrational, holding on to a cabin like it was a shrine, that Carol would have wanted me to live in the present, not the past. The mention of Carol's name in his mouth made something shift in my chest. Something old and solid shifted, like a load-bearing wall deciding it had absorbed enough pressure. I said, "You do not get to tell me what Carol would have wanted. You met her twice. She was already sick. She did not have the energy to tell you what she actually thought of you, so I will do it for her. She thought you were a salesman with no product. She told me that the night of your engagement dinner, now take your notary and go back to wherever she is parked, and do not bring this to me again." His face changed one more time. The calculation disappeared. What replaced it was something petty and vicious. He turned around. He walked to the center of the room, and he picked up a butter knife and tapped it against his water glass. The sound rang out across the dining room with a clarity that silenced every conversation in the space. 40 people looked at him. He smiled. He said he wanted to share something with the group before the official toast. He said he had been worried about me for some time, and that the people in this room, people who cared about me, deserved to know what was going on. He said that since Carol passed, I had not been myself. He said I had become emotionally volatile, that I was confused about basic financial matters, that I had been talking to Carol as if she were still in the house. He said Melissa had found me at the lake cabin in January, standing on the dock in the cold, talking to the water. He said they had looked into options, that there was a very good facility in Dublin, Ohio, and that they were hoping I would be open to a conversation about my long-term care before things got worse. He said all of this with the tone of a concerned son-in-law reading a prepared statement. The room was completely still. I looked at 40 faces. Some of them I had known for 25 years. I watched them process what they had just heard, watched the doubt begin to form behind their eyes, the particular discomfort of people who are being asked to choose between two versions of a man they respect. I did not defend myself in that moment. I considered it. I had the facts. I had the truth. I could have dismantled every word Dominic had just said in front of all of them. The trip to the lake cabin in January had been intentional. I had gone to sit with Carol on her birthday. I was not confused. I was grieving, which is a thing that Dominic Reyes had never once been forced to do. But I did not say any of that. I set my napkin on the table. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I walked to the coat check and retrieved my overcoat. I walked through the front door of the Severn house and out into the cold March night, and I stood on the sidewalk and breathed the air and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened inside. Then I pulled out my phone. I called Patricia Hale. Patricia was 58 years old. She had been my company attorney for 22 years, and my personal attorney for 15. She was the kind of lawyer who made opposing counsel request a continuance just to buy time to compose themselves before dealing with her. Carol had adored her. She was the only person I trusted completely after Carol died. When the grief was at its worst, in those first months, Patricia had simply shown up at my house on Saturday mornings with coffee and sat with me at the kitchen table without speaking, for as long as I needed. She never billed me for those hours. I never asked her to. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "Edward, you never call on a Saturday night." I said, "Patricia, I need you to listen carefully." I told her what had happened. All of it. Dominic's request, my refusal, the butter knife, the 40 people, the word facility. I kept my voice level. My hands were not shaking. I had gotten past the shaking. What I felt now was something much colder and much more deliberate. When I finished, there was a pause on her end. She said, "He did it publicly, in front of your people." I said, "Yes." She said, "He brought a notary to your anniversary dinner." I said, "She is apparently still in his car." There was another pause, shorter this time. She said, "Edward, I have been sitting on something for 6 weeks that I did not want to bring to you until I was certain. I am certain now. How fast can you get back inside? I said. Tell me first. She told me. Dominic had been running invoices through a shell company called Reyes Property Consulting LLC. The invoices were billed to Callaway Civil Group as project feasibility assessments. They looked legitimate at a glance. The amounts were calculated to sit just below the threshold that triggered automatic CFO review. Over 11 months, he had processed 43 invoices, totaling just over $87,000. $87,000 from my company. For work that was never done. For assessments of properties that did not exist, billed by a company whose registered agent was his mother, Gloria Reyes, from a house in Reynoldsburg. My daughter had signed 2 of those invoices. She was a project coordinator at the company. I had given her the job when they got married. I had thought it would be good for her. I had thought it would help her build something that was hers. I sat with that information for a moment on the cold sidewalk outside the Severn house. Then I said, Patricia, bring everything. Bring Marcus from litigation and whoever else you need. And call Dennis at the Financial Crimes Unit. I need him to know this is coming. She said, I will be there in 35 minutes. I said, I will be at the bar. I went back inside. Dominic was at the head table. He was relaxed, leaning back in his chair with the body language of a man who has survived the hard part of the evening. Melissa was beside him, not quite meeting my eyes when I came back through the door. The room had recovered into something approximating normal. Conversations had resumed. The waitstaff were bringing out the salads. I sat back down at my place. Gary Chen, who had been my lead structural engineer for 18 years, leaned over from 2 seats away and said, quietly, Ed, you doing okay? I said, I am doing better than I have in a while. Actually. Thank you, Gary. He looked at me for a moment and then nodded, because Gary Chen had known me long enough to understand the difference between a man who is falling apart and a man who is making a decision. I ordered a coffee. I ate the salad. I let the room breathe. I watched Dominic from across the table, and I thought about the pedestrian bridge in Cleveland. The one Carol had loved, the one that had taken 14 months to engineer because we refused to cut corners on the cable tension calculations. I thought about what it means to build something that holds. You do not rush it. You do not get emotional about the timeline. You measure twice, and you cut once, and you let the structure tell you when it is ready. 32 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Patricia, outside. We are 7. Ready when you are. I folded my napkin. I stood up from the table. Dominic glanced at me from the other end of the room, tracking me the way a man tracks a variable he thinks he controls. I walked to the front of the room. I did not pick up a butter knife. I did not tap a glass. I simply stood at the head of the table and waited until the room noticed me, which took about 4 seconds. Because 40 engineers have a professional habit of attention, I said, I owe everyone here an apology. What happened earlier tonight was not the anniversary celebration you deserved, and I am sorry for that. I want to take care of something quickly so that we can finish the evening properly. I nodded to the maitre d', who I had spoken to during my trip to the bar and who had already confirmed, very professionally, that the front doors could be held open. They opened. Patricia walked in first. She wore a charcoal blazer and carried a leather portfolio that I recognized because it was the one she only brought out for litigation. Behind her came Marcus Webb from our legal team and a woman I did not recognize but who moved with the specific, purposeful energy of someone who worked for a government agency. Behind them, 2 more people from Patricia's office, each carrying document folders. The room shifted. Not noisily. Engineers do not respond noisily to unexpected variables. They go quiet, and they start processing. Dominic stood up from his chair. His face had changed. The relaxed certainty was gone, and something more animal had replaced it. He said, What is this? Ed, what is going on? Patricia did not look at Dominic. She walked directly to me, placed the portfolio on the table in front of me, and said, in a voice calibrated to be heard by everyone in the room. Everything is in order. The Columbus PD Financial Crimes Liaison is outside. He is waiting on your word. The room was now completely still. I said, Patricia, please go ahead. She turned to face the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said, My name is Patricia Hale. I am the legal counsel for Callaway Civil Group and for Edward Callaway personally. I want to explain why I am here tonight. Because the people in this room have a right to know what has been happening inside the company they helped build. She opened the portfolio. She said, Over the past 11 months, 43 fraudulent invoices were submitted to Callaway Civil Group by an entity called Reyes Property Consulting, LLC. The invoices were submitted as project feasibility assessments. No work was ever performed. The total amount drawn from company accounts is $87,420. The registered agent of Reyes Property Consulting is Gloria Reyes. The sole beneficiary of those payments is Dominic Reyes. She slid a single sheet of paper toward the center of the table. It was a printout of the invoice log with the fraudulent entries highlighted in yellow. Dominic said, That is absurd. That is completely absurd. Those were legitimate consulting. Patricia said, Mr. Reyes, I would strongly encourage you to stop speaking. You have the right to an attorney. I would use it. He stopped speaking. She continued. She said, Tonight, Mr. Reyes attempted to pressure Mr. Callaway into signing over the deed to a personal property as collateral for a private real estate venture. When Mr. Callaway declined, Mr. Reyes made false and defamatory statements about Mr. Callaway's mental competency in front of witnesses. We have the room on audio. She held up her phone briefly. The Severn House permitted us to connect to their house system when we explained the situation 40 minutes ago. I heard someone at the far end of the table say, quietly, Oh my God. I looked at Melissa. She was staring at Patricia's portfolio with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not the expression of a woman who was surprised. It was the expression of a woman who had been hoping very hard that a particular thing was not true, and who was now being shown that it was. Her hands were flat on the table. Her face was white. Dominic reached across and grabbed her arm. He said her name, low and urgent. She pulled her arm back, just pulled it back, quietly, and kept staring at the paper. Patricia said, We will be coordinating with the Columbus Police Department regarding charges of wire fraud and theft by deception. Mr. Reyes, I am also serving you tonight with a civil complaint on behalf of the Callaway Civil Group Board of Directors. She slid a second document across the table toward him. He did not pick it up. Gary Chen, who had said nothing since Patricia walked in, said, Ed, do you need us to do anything? I said, No, thank you, Gary. I just needed you all to see it. Dominic pushed back from his chair. He stood up, and for a moment, I thought he was going to make a scene, and I was ready for it. But he did not. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me with an expression that was 1 part fury and 3 parts the hollow look of a man whose plan has completely collapsed. He picked up his phone from the table. He said nothing to me. He said nothing to Melissa. He walked to the door. The woman I did not know, the one who had come in with Patricia, stepped into his path. She held up credentials. She said, Mr. Reyes, I am Detective Carla Nguyen with the Columbus PD Financial Crimes Unit. I need you to come with me. Please. He looked at the badge for a long moment. He went with her. The room let out a breath that it had been holding for 4 minutes. I picked up the coffee cup I had carried from my place, and I drank what was left of it. Then I looked at Melissa, who had not moved. She was staring at the door Dominic had just walked through. I said her name. Just her name. Quietly, she looked at me, and her face did something complicated and painful that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror in the weeks after Carol died. It was the face of a person recalculating everything they thought they knew. She said, Dad, I didn't know about the money. I need you to know that. I need you to know that I didn't know. I said, I know you signed 2 of those invoices, Melissa. She closed her eyes. I said, I also know that you have worked for me for 4 years, and you have never once submitted a false document intentionally. I know the difference between negligence and conspiracy. Patricia knows the difference too. She opened her eyes. I said, what you said to him about me, about the cabin, about Carol. She looked down at the table. I said, I went to the cabin in January on your mother's birthday. I sat on the dock, and I talked to the water, because that is where I feel closest to her. I know she is not there. I have always known that. Grief is not confusion. Melissa, I need you to understand that before we can have any other conversation. Her chin trembled. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She said, he told me you were getting worse. He kept telling me things, and I wanted to believe him because it was easier than believing what he actually was. I said, I know. Gary Chen quietly stood up and said something to the room about giving the family a moment. And the room responded the way good people respond, by turning back to their dinners and their conversations and their wine, creating a small private space in the middle of a public room. I sat down next to Melissa, not across from her, next to her. I did not say anything for a moment. I just sat there, the way Patricia used to sit with me on Saturday mornings. Then I said, I am going to need you to be honest with me about everything you signed and everything you saw. All of it. Not to punish you, because I need the full picture. She nodded. I said, and I need to know what you actually want. Not what he wanted. Not what you thought I needed. What you want. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the waiter refilled my coffee without being asked. She said, I want to know who I am without him deciding that for me. I think I forgot somewhere. I said, that is a good thing to want. That is a starting point. We sat there for a while longer. The dinner resumed around us, carefully and generously, the way good people resume a celebration when a storm passes through and takes the worst of itself elsewhere. Gary Chen told a story about a drainage project in 1998 that went so badly sideways. We had to redesign the entire southern approach, and the table laughed, and I laughed with them. And it was not a performance. The laughter was real. The relief underneath it was real. At the end of the evening, after the last of the guests had gone, Patricia sat down across from me in the empty dining room. The candles were guttering. The waitstaff moved quietly around us, clearing the white tablecloths. She put a folder on the table. She said, there are some things we need to discuss regarding the family trust. I said, I know. She said, Dominic's attorney is going to argue that Melissa's involvement in the invoicing creates a conflict of interest that complicates her position as a beneficiary. I want to get ahead of that. I said, what do you recommend? She said, a restructured trust with an independent trustee. Melissa remains a beneficiary with conditions that protect both her and the estate. It removes Dominic entirely, which, given tonight, is straightforward. It also gives Melissa a framework for rebuilding her relationship with the company on legitimate terms if she chooses. I said, and the lake house? Patricia said, not in play. Not now. Not ever. Without your explicit written consent. I am putting a deed restriction on it tonight. I nodded. I looked at the folder. Then I looked past it. At the window. At the dark street outside. At the reflection of the candlelight in the glass. I had been thinking, for the past several weeks, about a conversation Carol and I had the summer before she got sick. We were at the lake, on the dock, in the early evening when the water goes flat and reflective. She had been reading about engineering scholarships, the kind aimed at first-generation college students, kids from small towns who wanted to build things but did not have the financial runway to get started. She had said, with that particular certainty she had about the things that mattered, that if we ever had more than we needed, that was where it should go. 4,000, with thine work. 4,000, 4,000, 4,000, 4,000. 4,000. 4,000. 4,000. I had said, "We will get to that." She had said, "Don't wait too long, Ed." I pulled the folder toward me. I said, "Patricia, I want to set something up. Separately from the trust restructuring. I want to establish a scholarship fund." She said, "Tell me." I said, "Engineering students. First generation. Priority given to kids from rural Ohio. The kind of towns we built roads through. I want to call it the Carroll Calloway Fund for Civil Engineering." Patricia did not say anything for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in the candlelight. She said, "I will draft the documents this week." I said. "She told me not to wait too long," Patricia said, softly. She was usually right about that. I signed the initial authorization papers there at the table, with a pen Patricia produced from her jacket pocket, while the last of the candles burned down around us, and the waitstaff moved quietly and respectfully at the edges of the room. I drove home alone. The F-250 moved through the empty Columbus streets, past the intersections I had engineered and the overpasses I had built, and the bridge approach on the east side that had taken 6 months longer than projected, because we found a bedrock anomaly, and I refused to pretend we had not found. And the city sat solid under its own weight, the way cities do when they have been built by people who cared about what held them up. I parked in the driveway of the house Carol and I had lived in for 27 years. I sat in the truck for a minute. The porch light was on. It was always on. I had not turned it off since she died. I was aware that this was sentimental. I did not care. Melissa had texted me from the restaurant. She said, "I'm staying at my friend Dana's tonight. I'll call you tomorrow, if that's okay." I said, "Of course. Sleep well." She said, "Dad, I love you." "I'm sorry." I said, "I know. I love you too. We'll figure the rest out." I went inside. I made a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, where Patricia used to sit with me on Saturday mornings, and I let the quiet of the house settle around me. It was not a lonely quiet anymore. It was the quiet of a house that had survived something, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when you walk outside and see that the foundation is still solid and the roof is still on, and the things that were built to last have lasted. In the morning I would call Gary Chen and start the process of explaining to the board what had happened and what came next. I would call the foundation attorney Patricia recommended. I would drive out to the lake house and sit on the dock and tell Carol about the scholarship fund, because that was not confusion. That was love. And I was done apologizing for knowing the difference. I finished the tea. I turned off the kitchen light. I left the porch light on. I had spent 30 years building things that were meant to hold. Bridges and roads and overpasses that people drove over without thinking about them, which was the highest compliment an engineer could receive. You built it right, and then you got out of the way, and it held, and people went where they needed to go. A man's life was not so different, I had decided. You built what you could. You fixed what broke. You let go of the things that were pulling the whole structure down, and when you had cleared the debris away, you looked at what remained, and you started to build again. That was not an ending. That was how you began. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And subscribe to Revenge Chronicles, because the next story is one you will not want to miss.